gardening or tending to flower beds. And you also know from doing this the challenges of gardening, of keeping the weeds out. Let me ask you, how would you define a weed? What is it that makes a plant a weed? And why are weeds so bad? Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines a weed as a plant that is not valued where it is growing and is usually of vigorous growth, especially one that tends to overgrow or choke out more desirable plants. So, according to this definition, even a rose could be considered a weed. If it's growing somewhere that it shouldn't be, then it is a weed. When we lived in Shreve, we had a small garden there, and I was in charge of it because I knew what I planted and I knew which plants were weeds. I started gardening at an early age with my grandparents and my parents, like I'm sure many of you have. And over the years, there are a few things that I learned about gardening. The first is, nothing ever looks like it does on the seed packet. The only way that you can absolutely be sure that it's going to rain is to go out and give your garden a good soaking. Weeds grow at precisely the same rate that you pull them out. However bare your lawn is, grass will always appear in the cracks of your patio or your driveway. Annuals mean disappointment once a year. And when weeding, the best way to make sure that you're removing a weed and not a valuable plant is to simply pull on it. If it comes out of the ground easily, it's a valuable plant. In today's parable, Jesus tells about this farmer who knows that he has sown good seed. He has sown wheat. And as these plants begin to mature, his workers discover that there are weeds that are mixed in with the good wheat. And they ask him, should we go out and pull up the weeds? And the farmer tells them, no, don't pull up the weeds just yet. You might accidentally pull out some of that wheat. This farmer didn't want to damage the intended harvest simply because the weeds were planted there. So instead of spraying Roundup and killing everything in his path, the farmer asked the servants to be patient and see what grows. This farmer was not willing to separate the wheat from the weeds until harvest time, when he could absolutely be sure which was which. Now, when Jesus taught, he would use these parables, these artful word pictures, to teach. And in this parable, Jesus is drawing us a picture of God's mercy. You see, God doesn't just go out and chop down the weeds with a machete. Instead, God waits and hopes for a change. God has mercy and patience, more than some of us gardeners do. Now, botanically speaking, if you plant a sunflower seed, what will you get? Sunflower. If you plant a tomato seed, you'll get a tomato plant. Whatever the seed is when it goes into the ground determines what it will be when it reaches maturity. We cannot make a lettuce seed produce corn. It's not possible. But what is not possible in the world of seeds occurs frequently in the world of human beings. Botanically speaking, a seed is a seed. Seeds do not change, but people do. Though a trained gardener may be able to judge between what the wheat and the weeds are early on, it's hard to say how a person is going to turn out from what they look like in the early stages of growth. Now, I've never actually been to an English garden. I've seen pictures of them, and they are beautiful. The flowers are carefully arranged in rows and fancy configurations and designs. You won't see a weed or an unclipped shrub. The garden is striking in that it fits the design of its creator, and all the parts fit together as one body. There are no weeds to distract from the flower or to suck the life out of them. But we find in Jesus' parable today that God's garden is not an English garden. Actually, it's a messy garden and it's full of weeds. In our parable this morning, the weeds and the wheat are allowed to grow up together. Now, the word in Jesus' parable that's interpreted as weed should really be called a tare. And a tare was a type of plant that in its immature stages looked almost identical to wheat. It was only when the tare put on its seeds and was ready for harvest could it truly be distinguished from the wheat. Remember that Jesus said, "You will know them by their fruit." So Jesus came into this world to show us what God's kingdom is all about. Jesus came to the sinners, to the poor, to the hungry. Jesus welcomed in the tax collectors and the prostitutes, the people that would fit the description of a weed by many standards. And then Jesus tells those religious leaders of his day, the ones who thought they were the good wheat, that these are the kind of folks who are entering the kingdom of God ahead of them. And you know what? Jesus' ministry is to be our ministry. And Jesus' ministry is a messy business. So the main point of this parable might be, who knows where God may be at work? Throughout the Bible, God's people sometimes look a lot like weeds until they grow to maturity and somehow blossom into beautiful flowers. You remember Moses? He stuttered, couldn't speak very well. He was unsure of his ability to get a clear point across. But with God's help, he flourished. Or think about Saul. Saul started off persecuting Christians. He would round up everyone who believed in Jesus. Christians feared coming in contact with him. But one day, as he was riding along the road, a blinding light struck him. And soon after that, he is the most fervent missionary God has ever had. You see, when God gets hold of a worthless seed, a worthless weed, it can often transform into something beautiful. That person who looks like a weed to you just might produce some beautiful flowers if given enough time and enough attention. Sometimes you just can't tell a weed from the wheat, no matter how hard you try. When you see that immature sprout, you don't know what fruit that it may bear as it grows. So the weeds and the wheat are allowed to grow up together. And you know what? We are all weeds, and we are all wheat, are we not? We are saved by grace, but that inward battle of lust, greed, pride, and apathy toward the plight of others still rages within inside of us. As sinners who have been redeemed, we can acknowledge that we are often unloving, irritable, angry, and resentful with those closest to us. We still have weeds planted among our wheat. But the good news is that God not only loves us as we are, but also knows us as we are. And God is not through with us yet. Following Jesus means that each day we face our broken mess. We accept and we pray that and trust that God will change us from weeds into wheat. There was a young woman about 20 years of age who had been living on the streets of a suburban neighborhood for about 5 years because of her severely abusive alcoholic parents. Now, she was a pleasant-looking woman behind those tattered and dirty clothes and her oily hair and her dirty face. Somehow she had managed to avoid the alcohol that her parents lived for and the drugs that soothe most of the other homeless people in the area. She had a little old Bible that her aunt had given her when she was 11 years old. She kept it in her one canvas bag that held all of her earthly belongings. She got by like most homeless folks, rummaging for bottles and cans and asking the person for spare change. But she never gave herself up to prostitution or to stealing. For all the years of torment, her only refuge was that little Bible. She learned it inside and out. And of course, it helped to lead her to depend on the Lord, and in turn grew her love towards Him. She had too much pain, though, and not enough skills to get out of the situation that she was in. But she tried to live as close as she could to how that little Bible instructed her to. Now, for years, she watched people go to the church a couple blocks away from the place that she slept alone in the bushes. She would look at all the well-dressed people get out of their cars and walk into church as families. She would go and sit in the parking lot and listen to the muffled music of the worship service. She would sit there and pray, and she would read her Bible till the end of the service. And then she would watch as the people mingled and laughed and hugged before they got back into their cars and drove off. This was her church service. At night, she dreamed of being like those people, but she believed that she could never fit in there. Finally, one day, she mustered up the courage and decided that she would take the money that she had from her collections, and instead of buying food, she went to the Goodwill to buy the prettiest dress that she could find. Now, she didn't know how a dress should fit, but the one that she bought thought looked very well on her. The following Sunday, she got up early. She gathered up all the courage that she had and put on that dress. She tried her best to get cleaned up and to do something with her hair. She trembled with nervousness as she made her way to the church, and she tried to sneak in so that no one would have to shake her hand. Of course, there was no place to hide, so she walked through the foyer, attracting a few looks of disgust. But but mostly people just looked away and ignored her. It took everything that she had not to run out of that building that morning, but she stayed. She found a seat way in the back. And she sat there and she prayed until the service started. She sobbed not so silently throughout the entire service, knowing that she would probably never put herself through this again. But she felt ecstatic about having had the chance to at least be a part of one church service in her life. To experience some of what these people got to experience every week. She found herself hesitating to leave at the end of the service because she wanted to get all that she could out of it before being asked to leave, or just bolting out to her way of life. When she decided to get up and leave, the foyer was busy and it took some effort and much discomfort walking alone through the crowd of cheerful people. She finally did escape, and as she walks toward her home, a young teenage girl noticed the color of her dress, and she interrupted her father and asked who this girl was. He glanced up quickly, and as he finished his conversation, he looked more intently as this girl exited the parking lot. This family, as they were driving home, they could see this girl walking into the bushes a few blocks away in her dress. Now, this family happened to take in foster kids who were preparing for independent living when they turned 18. The father had, in fact, also helped finance a low-cost building project for homeless in a nearby city. So the following Saturday, this family went in search of this girl as their curiosity has increased over the week. The father went into the bushes where he saw her enter the previous Sunday, and he found her sleeping there with an old blanket over her and her little Bible sitting open beside her. Not wanting to startle her, he kept saying hello to her from a distance until she finally woke up. Before anything else was said, he quickly asked if she was the one that had come to their church last Sunday. She hesitantly said, yes. Well, the family put her up in a hotel for the night. The mother gave her some clothes and some makeup and some toiletries. They told her they'd pick her up Sunday morning to take her to church. When they arrived, she had been ready for hours. When they saw her, they could barely recognize her because of the difference. Now, she thought, I get to go to church like everyone else does. After church that Sunday, the family took her out for lunch, and by the end of it, they had invited the girl to come and live with them, kind of like an adult foster kid. Within a year, she had enrolled and was successful in Bible college, knowing the Bible as well or better than many of her professors. Today, she is living on her own and is the children's ministry director of an even larger church in that community, which has a huge outreach program for homeless people that she helped initiate. This woman looked like a weed, but she turned out to be one of the finest strains of wheat in God's kingdom. For myself, I'm sure glad that God waits a while and tells his servants to hold back on plucking out the weeds. Because I don't know about you, but there are days and times when I feel more like a weed than I do a piece of wheat. Aren't you glad that God waits instead of cutting down the weeds early? Amen. Would you please